Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined by my guest today, Dr. Anastasia Giannakidou. Thank you for joining us.
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you.
You published a book in 2021 called Truth and Verticality in Grammar and Thought, and you talk about truth and meaning in there. Let's start with that. Let's distinguish those two terms.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Let's start with the concept of truth. It's one of the central concepts. We talk about it a lot, sometimes even denying it. Truth is a concept that we find already in antiquity being examined and being thought about. It's generally, we could say, the property of sentences to agree with the outside world. This is at least how Aristotle defines truth in his Metaphysics. He says that when a sentence says of what is that it is, then that sentence is true. And when it says of what is not what it is not, the sentence again is true. So truth is something that is always referential to the world. The other part of the title of the book, verticality, is something that relates to how people understand the truthfulness of sentences. So it is something that involves both this thinking with respect to the outside world, but also the formation of particular mental states in the minds of speakers about whether a sentence is true or not.
Sure. So just to go into this a little bit more slowly. So some sentences then are true on the face of it, right?
Right.
It's like, raining or it's not raining, right?
Exactly. Today is Tuesday. Right. It's true because we know that it is Tuesday.
But other sentences imply that they're true.
Right.
But aren't necessarily verifiably true, right?
Exactly. And some sentences, for example, sentences that contain the so-called evaluative or subjective predicates. So if I have a sentence like, this fish is tasty, okay, right. And that sentence contains the predicate tasty, then it is a matter of opinion whether that sentence is true. And again, truth will make reference to the speaker's experience. So two speakers actually can disagree about whether this fish is tasty. If someone is a vegetarian and never eat fish, then right. they will consider the sentence, this fish is tasty, to be false. And in this case, we have the phenomenon of faultless disagreement, and truth can never be determined with respect to the world. It will be determined with respect to how a particular speaker and the audience feel about that. But the processes by which we come, so the speaker and the hearer in this particular case, come to two different conclusions, that the fish is and that the fish is not tasty. The process by which they individually come to those statements is the process of veridicality formation. And it's based on their own experiences. So we reach truth based on experiences and based on looking at the outside world. Some of the experiences, of course, are also components of the world because they have to right. do with what we live in the outside world.
And a lot of applications for this work you're doing here, but certainly one of the more important ones is that those of us who are in democracies believe that we are debating public issues, that we're trying to determine the truth, and that we reach a consensus on these things, that we've discovered the best course of action. And right. so it's important for us to be able to discern when someone's making a statement, if it's a true statement or if it's a false statement or a maybe statement, right?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. It's of paramount importance, and I think that's part of why I wrote this book. I feel that when we seek truth, and truth-seeking, as I said at the beginning, is something very old. It's an engagement, it's an intellectual activity that we find in Aristotle. He defines this concept of alithevin, which is truth-seeking. And there are various kinds of truth-seeking, one of which is the scientific truth-seeking that is based on principles. The other one is truth-seeking in rhetoric and in forming relations in the public sphere. I think it is very important to maintain this course of seeking truth in public discourse because, indeed, by focusing on truth and by seeking it, we engage in rational discourse.
Yes.
And I think the basis of rationality, or rationality itself, can form the basis of true communication and therefore a better democracy. You cannot have a democracy when you have people communicate in non-rational ways, or when there is not, let's say, a generally agreed upon foundation of what is true.
So a basic assumption here then is that people are seeking the truth in the first place, right?
Right.
Which is something that Aristotle
Right.
talks about.
As creatures, we seek truth, because, and I think this is very important, I think seeking truth is also essential to the survival of the species. Imagine, you know, the hunter-gatherer communities in the first societies that we formed.
Yeah.
If people lied to one another, or if they had very different conceptions of reality, and
there's no saber-toothed tiger over there. You
right,
can
right,
go down
yeah,
that
you
path,
can
right?
go, and then that, you know, leads
Yeah.
to the demise of the tribe. So it's very essential. It's not just a luxury. It's very essential for maintaining what is good and necessary for life.
Now, you're studying this at a level that most people never think about, right? You're looking at it in terms of what words we use to construct our sentences and things like that. Is it possible that some languages are more conducive to having philosophical discussions like this than others?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you. Indeed, language, and this is the idea here, gives us clues about truth within the sentence, and every language does that. So, for instance, if I say, you know, it is raining, if I have the choice to say it is raining and it might be raining, if I say it might be raining, by using this modal verb might, you understand immediately that I'm not sure whether it's raining. So I'm in a non-veridical position. So you can't trust that it is raining.
Yeah.
So every language has devices like that, which are these modal words. Greek and Italian, in addition, have this device that I call mood in the book, which is the indicative and the subjunctive. Other languages have that too. Spanish, for example, all the Romance languages have it.
But English, no.
But English doesn't. Yeah. So English, however, resorts to these modal verbs as devices to express what a subjunctive would express in a language, say, like Italian or Greek. So in English, we can say something like, I believe that John is sick, but we can also say, I believe that John might be sick. So the certainty of my belief in the second case is weakened because I use the word might. Now, in Italian, in that case, you would have used the subjunctive to indicate that you have a kind of weaker belief, that you believe, but you're not absolutely sure that it is, that John is sick.
So there was a word that I would use that
Right.
would say,
So there are
I
these...
think this, but I'm not sure. It would,
Exactly,
yes.
exactly, right.
And there's a whole
whole literature,
array
a
of those
whole
words,
range of that. And part of the book is what regulates the use of these devices, the modal verbs or the subjunctive mood. And the claim is that the modal verbs and subjunctive moods are veridicality weakeners. So speakers use them when they cannot commit to the truth of sentences. They can't say with absolute certainty that what I say is true. And so they use these devices to signal to the audience that, look, don't trust me 100%, you know. And so they are sincerity operators in a way.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting, since you asked about the public discourse, is that we do find fewer and fewer of these usages, which we can think of as hedges as well, in the
weasel
public
words.
discourse.
I think they're called weasel words.
Yeah, whistle words, right,
Okay.
right, exactly, in English. So we find fewer and fewer of these in public discourse or in political speech, for example. Like words like that, that weaken the veridicality, are actually signals that I am not absolutely sure. And in discourses where you actually need to show that you're absolutely sure, which is political speech, or in online discourses such as tweets, where you really need to be short and succinct, you tend to not find very many of those.
In English.
In English. And I suspect in other languages as well, but the work needs to be done.
So there's a cultural factor here, obviously. So we're saying then that that it's not bad to use those words, that it's good to use those words because they're making our language more accurate, right?
They're making the language more accurate, and they more sincerely convey what we know.
Because we don't always know.
We don't always know.
We can be pretty sure. We
Exactly.
can be unsure, right? There's
Absolutely.
a whole range of reactions we can have. It seems to me that in American culture, particularly in politics, that one is always supposed to sound like one knows exactly what they're talking
Right,
about.
this is one of the properties of American discourse, indeed.
So,
One has to...
tell me what you think about that. What's your observation?
I think it's funny. I think it's a property. So certainty is, I think, a dangerous property to have in discourse.
In fact, you know, Aristotle says that everything we talk about using rhetoric is something that we can't prove. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using rhetoric. We'd be talking philosophy and science, right?
Absolutely. And for Aristotle, since you mentioned him, exactly, truth in this provable sense is only something that characterizes scientific discourse and the concept of episteme, which is science. So in every other field, it is about convincing. Therefore, we know that parts of what we say do rely on certain objective facts and do convey certain things that we know for sure and that we have evidence for. But we do say a lot of things that we have absolutely no evidence for. Or we can't, consciously prove the evidence. I mean, I may even know the theory of gravity, but I can't prove it.
Right.
I nevertheless know that it is true, and I take it to be true.
No theories of gravity are provable, I think, but yes.
Yeah, so we need to have a physicist to just make sure.
It's a bit of a rhetorical discussion, I think.
Right, right. Yeah. But so we talk a lot with unprovable propositions, and that's why sincerity is important. And this principle of veridicality that we posted here in the book, which is the principle that says that when two interlocutors enter a conversation, and if they want to be cooperative, which means that they don't want to deceive each other, but they want to sincerely communicate and augment the amount of information that they each have, then they enter by following this principle. So they say what they know or believe to be true. This is how this principle is formulated in the book. So they don't say what is true, but what they know or believe to be true. And then we have to realize that that belief is sincere. And in certain conversations, like the one that we're having right now, we can accept that that belief is sincere because we do enter in this cooperative spirit.
And that brings more reason into the discussion.
Absolutely.
Then, right? Because you're closer to
the truth.
And something the truth is that you don't know, right?
Truth is the foundation for reason. We cannot have reasoned discussion if we cannot make reference to truth. Exactly. But the question is, right now, we have a number of discourses, as I said, Twitter discourses, online discourses, which have certain characteristics such as, let's say, shortened message. Here in our conversation right now, I can expand a little bit. I can use more than 1, 2, 3 sentences to make the point. In Twitter, you have to use very shortened speech. The goal, the telos, is not necessarily the exchange of information, but it is to convince, or to convince towards a particular side without reference to truth. And so these particular goals undermine this principle of veridicality. And so we can never assume that the person that writes the tweet actually follows or says what they know or believe to be true. Now, there is a bigger question that has to do, how do speakers then and audiences form trust? How do they trust what they read? Like when we trust something, again, we form a veridicality judgment. Trust is a sort of belief that I have. I read something or I hear something, and then I form the belief that, oh yes, this is probably true, or no, this can't be true. If I come right now and tell you the earth is flat, you will probably be shocked and you'll say that can't be true because it contradicts your own beliefs and assumptions, which form a knowledge, an epistemic basis for saying, no, I have to reject that proposition. So you can trust your own knowledge and veridicality judgment to say, no, that sentence can't be true because that sentence so blatantly contradicts what is known. And often what is known is also, I feel that I'm talking too much, but often what is known is formed by a community. So in fact, that the earth is not flat is known by a community, it's not some knowledge that one particular person holds. But in Twitter or in Facebook or in online discourses, we read basically the opinions of people that write these messages. And of course, we can't react as interlocutors. We can't respond because it's not a conversation. It's more like a speech.
It's one way.
It's one way. It's monodirectional. Yeah. And so it is challenging to see, you know, how people trust and how people mistrust.
I think historically there was always the assumption that people were seeking the truth, and if they knew they were wrong, they would want to know that, or if they knew that something was unsure, they would want to know it was unsure. But I've just observed over the years, particularly watching political elections and campaigns, that voters almost don't trust someone who doesn't sound like he or she knows exactly what's true and what isn't true. I remember. In the, I think the George Bush Sr. election, it was, analysts were saying that whoever gets elected is going to have to raise taxes. And both candidates refused to comment on it, right?
Right.
And so finally the Democratic candidate at a press conference said, okay, look, I admit, if I'm elected, I have to raise taxes, right? And so then they went to George Bush and they said, oh, he says he's going to raise taxes. What are you going to do? And he said, read my lips, no new taxes. So he said it as emphatically as he possibly could, right? And then he got elected and he raised taxes.
Right, right. I use actually this as an example often in my semantics class.
But and so this friend of mine, Gardner, was going to vote for Bush, the Republican, and I said, but he's lying to you, right? I mean, you know that whoever gets elected is going to have to raise taxes. And he said to me, I'm not going to vote for anybody who's stupid enough to say he's going to raise taxes in an election.
Oh, I see.
so he had no expectation that we were talking about truth.
Right,
and the fact that one candidate was more truthful, he saw as a detriment.
That is very interesting. Right, so then maybe...
Welcome to America.
Yeah, welcome to America. As a Greek, I still feel culturally alien a little bit when I study, the tendencies and things. Yeah. So what you're saying is that audiences in particular types of discourses, like political discourse, expect a particular performativity in how the message is going to be dressed up and packaged.
I think so. And another example of that is Jimmy Carter, who gave what was referred to as the malaise speech, where we had the energy crisis, and he said, I want to bring in experts so we can talk about this and see what we're going to do.
Right.
And it undermined his credibility because he didn't know what to do. He had to ask people for advice.
I see, and again, it was because it was sincerity, and he took his job at
But in reality, who knows what we're supposed to do about energy or any of those issues, right? I mean, there are no absolutes.
There are no absolutes, and also because a lot of these issues are with reference to the future. And that's another generalization here in the book, that any statement about the future is non-veridical, because the future is not something that has happened. So only the things that have happened or are happening right now are things that can be known. Anything in the future cannot be known.
Part of the definition of deliberative discourse, Aristotle again, right?
Right, exactly. But again, we find in political discourse a lot of statements about the future. In Greek political discourse a lot. This is very characteristic of promises. Like we promise by using a lot of future statements. And those future statements then, when they come to be or not be realized, nobody is held accountable for, having said something that is false.
Yeah.
Because one can actually say that, well, that was a future statement, so strictly speaking, there was no true value at the time of the statement. Yeah. And this is also, by the way, what Aristotle believed. He believed that future sentences do not have a truth value at the time of utterance, that they're not true or false, they are non-veridical, they're undecided. Yeah. We can only know what is and what was. Yeah.
So, how does this apply to cognition itself? I mean, we're talking about public discussion and discovering truth as a society, right? What about when we have internal dialogue? Do we use these words, and are they important to us when we're thinking and trying to evaluate things?
We definitely do. Yeah. So when we think to ourselves and we do our monologues, like either with words speaking to ourselves or in our minds, we do form our thoughts by using similar devices. But I think that when we talk to ourselves, we can be a little more sincere or a little bit more truthful. Though And it is also characteristic, like when children, for example, learn language, one of the first things that they learn is the past tense, for instance. Like the past appears very early, future not so. So that's another, because the future is a more complex category. Another thing that appears very early when kids form understandings of language, and again, the children, when they learn language, their cognition is very impoverished, and that's not comparing, because it's just their brain is not fully formed. Right. And their hearing or their understanding, their capacity to do more advanced thinking is just maturing. So, but nevertheless, they're able to learn language, and one of the first things that the children learn is actually negation. So the kids, so things like, you know, don't open the window, or it's not raining outside, mommy, no mommy go. So we have expressions like that, no mommy go, no sunny outside. They use this word no very often, which is the opposite of verticality. So negation is, again, the opposite of verticality, and it is a very basic category of human cognition and of human language. Like no other linguistic systems or no other communication systems, let's say animal communication systems, or even advanced communication systems such as chimpanzee talk, none of them have negation.
Really?
No. Negation is something deeply human.
Yeah,
one of my favorite professors, Professor Larry Horn, who was also my advisor from Yale, he actually wrote that, he wrote a book, Natural History of Negation, and in that book, he actually claimed that negation is one of these very primitive properties of human language. And negation is the opposite of verticality. Notice that we don't have expressions of affirmation, like yes, other than yes and no, but we mark positivity, we mark negation by using negation inside a sentence, like it isn't raining outside, but we don't have something like it is indeed raining outside, something like indeed to mark positivity. So positivity is a kind of default, this verticality, like the truthfulness, seeking to be truthful. And then negation, which is the opposite of that, is something that appears very early in human cognition, very early. And it even appears in systems that are not based on oral communication, so sign languages, home sign systems, so more immature sign systems that are developed by children that learn sign in smaller communities. They also have expressions of negation.
That's interesting.
It is very interesting.
I have a 2-year-old grandson.
You do?
The last time I saw him, he was just saying the word not. No, it was no. I think it was no.
No,
and whatever we said to him, he went no, and then he laughed.
It's incredible.
So what he was doing is he was really expressing that he had
reached
some new threshold of understanding.
He understood that. And negation's function is to oppose the propositional content. And it can be of various kinds. So you can say it is raining outside. No. Mommy will go to bed now. No.
You must have heard him. Yes.
Oh, I have all the no's. Very characteristic of child language, and it's very basic. It's very important.
Now,
to negate is very important as well.
We're talking about this at the level of cognition. What's the role of emotion here? Because emotion, you know, Aristotle says warps the carpenter's rule, right? We should leave it out of our discourse, but it influences us all the time, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Aristotle was very logical, and he did not want to appeal to emotion. Of course, whenever we form verticality judgments, or whenever we assess sentences that are meaningful, we do use our emotion or our expectations. You know, if I am like a Trump supporter, I will say, oh, you know, Trump will win the next elections. But if I am not a Trump supporter, I will say, oh, Trump will definitely not even be a candidate. So what we say and what we understand is formed by what we know, but also by how we stand towards facts and propositions.
Well, actually, the Trump supporters would say he won the last election, right?
Oh, right.
That's where we're at this point,
Yes, and that would be exactly a very different reading of the reality. Exactly. So emotion, as we say in the book, is part of the epistemic basis, and it determines to a certain extent whether we trust the message to be true or not. And I think, again, in online discourses and in shortened discourses, emotion plays a big role. I think, frankly, emotion nowadays plays a bigger role than it should be, because emotion often dilutes or clouds our ability to just look at fact.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes if we part of emotion that is often used in discourse is desire, for example, and often we confuse what we want to be true with what is true. Again, Trump supporters. So, so it is. Desire is non-veridical. It's not veridical. And we know that also because I want to go to Paris and I don't want to go to Paris.
Yeah.
I want to be with him and I don't want to be with him. This is not a contradiction. So whenever we actually have desires, we can have conflicting desires, although we can't have conflicting beliefs.
Right.
I cannot believe that it is Tuesday today and believe that it is not Tuesday today. That's a contradiction. So emotive predicates don't necessarily lead us to truth.
That's all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Dr. Anastasia Giannakidou for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.